No worries. Perfect. So welcome everyone to our June Ask an Expert. Very exciting one we have today. So we're on security, compliance and governance in the PPM, reducing delivery risk through trusted platforms and partners. Thank you, Pete. So like always, we've got a bit of housekeeping before we begin. This session is being recorded and will be sent out to you after. However, if you do have a question, we just ask that you remain on mute, but put your hand up or leave it in the comment section. We will have a Q&A session at the end. And yes, follow-up content will also be sent out shortly after. Thanks, Pete. So we've got some new presenters with us today. So we've got from Sensei, Graham, Chris and Michelle, and we have Pete from Altus. I'll pass over to you, Pete.
Thanks, Ellie, and welcome everyone. So we're going to get straight into the presentation. We have a lot of information to cover today. So starting off with what's in the agenda, I'm going to sort of start off with a little bit of a little bit of covering what the stigma of security compliance governance sort of takes, and we'll go into a few sort of use case scenarios. A big chunk of the presentation today is around, we've developed like a 10-point checklist for you. That will be something you can download after the presentation, but really going through each of those checklists. So I'll start with covering off a few of those items. I'll hand over to my colleague, Graham, and then Chris as well will sort of work through that. Towards the back of that section, we've got a part where we go and navigate, sort of help, I guess, instigating the chat around how do we navigate that AI risk exposure landscape, because it is a bit of a tricky one that in what is already a quite a complex and layered landscape that we're dealing with already in security. So, and then we'll hand over to Michelle towards the end, and who will take us home with how do you choose a partner that you can trust, and sort of what are the things that you should look out for there. But first of all, if I can warm up with, if you're excited to talk security today, can you give me a little a reaction of a thumbs up perhaps on the call here? And if you're super excited, maybe even a love heart. So let's see, got one or two. Okay, we've got a few. All right, even a few love hearts. I love it. So clearly we've got the right team in place today. You might find this a little bit sometimes, right? So sometimes that security may come across as words like boring, or sometimes when we talk to security to people, the expression on their face kind of resembles this young lady that we're seeing on the screen as well too. But it can be sometimes a bit of a tough topic, and again, it is quite layered and can be quite complex. So it's something we definitely need to navigate. So it's not hard to believe that security and governance are often viewed as a compliance exercise, but it's up until something goes wrong, where then we all realize how significant and important this is. So to cite a few examples of more the extreme side of the cases here. So you may remember these ones that I'm about to show. Back in 2022, there was the Altus data breach incident that happened. So somewhere between the range of 2.5 to 10 million customer records were stolen. It was attributed allegedly to an unsecured application interface, which is, I'd hate to be the person who actually was responsible for that one. And I guess a caution out there to the vibe coders in the community. Yep, cool functionality, but please make sure things are secure, because this is one of those extreme cases where things go wrong, right? And it was something estimated around $1.5 billion of reduction in the brand value there. Not fun. Another one a little later on, which was May 2024, with a company called Medisecure. So they're a prominent electronic prescription service provider, and they basically had a ransomware attack that had something along the range of 6.5 terabytes of data that kind of got locked down, and as ransomware is something where you can't access that data unless you pay a significant amount of money usually, but apparently that's one of our largest cyber security incidents in Australian history. And lastly, one that you probably remember, which was around July 2024. There's a faulty software update that was from a company called CrowdStrike. It actually affected the Microsoft Windows ecosystem and hit about 8.5 million systems that were basically affected and crashed across the world. You probably remember this one. I remember I was camping and I couldn't get groceries, first world problem, but this kind of sucks when you're out camping, you had no food left. But yeah, there was, aviation, there was hospitals affected, petrol pumps, everything. It was just quite a significant attack. Now, why that wasn't a cybersecurity attack per se, it's still important, I guess, to show how far-reaching the impact of vulnerabilities in interconnected digital systems can actually be. So these things are super important to get right. And again, deliberately extreme examples, but you can see how when things go wrong, we're extremely grateful for the teams that are sitting behind the scenes, sort of looking after our systems. So here's the checklist that I was referring to. So here's our 10-point checklist. There'll be a little download that will be in a PDF format that you can grab after this session. Okay, so we're just now going to go through each section, then I'll cover the first three, and then we'll hand over to Graham and Chris will sort of tag team between this as well. So first one up, your data. Where does your data live? You should be asking yourself that. So in the context of, we're talking PPM systems here today, but really you could probably apply the majority of the principles that we're going to discuss here to any software. So it's actually a really good thing to consider no matter what system you're actually putting in. So first one is data sovereignty. So this refers to specifically where is the physical location, what country is this living in, and sort of what are those laws and regulations that the country or the jurisdiction that data is actually residing in, sort of what applies to that. That's important to know. Sort of closely behind that is also where's the tenant ownership, which is, where is the physical hardware of the data there, where my system is lying. And sorry, I just got a thing pop up here. And the next one being data portability. So data portability is more about, how easily you can sort of export, transfer, or even reuse your data across different systems, or sort of just getting stuff out shouldn't be so hard, or being able to talk to each other, to other internal systems, perhaps. That's another important factor to consider when you're choosing a system. And also the vendor lock-in risk, so how dependent on a specific provider will this solution make you? And what about, if we would decide to move out, would something that potentially is the cheapest platform maybe becomes the most expensive platform to leave on? So there's another lock-in risk that you need to be aware of. And there's also backup and recovery responsibilities too, right? So when you have backups, like, there's a situation of how long would it take to be able to restore to a certain point. So if we had an incident, how quick could we get back up and running? And also how far back can we go to? Can we get very granular in the specific point in time where we need to restore an entire system? So backup recovery. So there's a part we call the tomorrow morning test. It's basically a 5-question sort of scenario. And if you answer, I'm not sure, or the answer is no, then there is a governance risk worth investigating. So the first one up here is, hey, if our vendor ceased trading tomorrow, could we still access our data? If our contract ended tomorrow, could we export our data? And if our tenant was compromised tomorrow, could we recover our data? All right. If our regulators ask where our data resides tomorrow, could we answer that confidently? And lastly here, if AI began analyzing our portfolio data tomorrow, would we know where the data was sourced from? Okay, so again, I'm not sure, or the answer is no. Definitely worth further investigation there. So moving on to part 2. So are security credentials independently verified? So there's a bunch of stuff when it comes to certifications and alignment to policies and standards. So one of the gold standard ones out there is sort of globally recognized. You might have heard of ISO certification before. A fun fact about that is it's actually international organizations for standardization. So if you look at that acronym, it's kind of iOS, but no, it's ISO. So the word ISO comes apparently from a Greek word called isos, and that is meaning equal. So the organization could use a consistent name across all their languages. So fun fact for anyone who's sort of familiar with the ISO certification on how that acronym came to be. IRAP alignment is another one. So Information Security Registered Assessors Program is what that fancy word stands for. And it's something that was developed by the Australian Signals Directorate, I can't say that properly, Directorate, so ASD. And yeah, so that's another gold standard that we sort of see, particularly across government industries as well. But another thing just worth noting, that Microsoft released an IRAP report in March earlier this year that covers off from a Microsoft's perspective around the Azure and the Dynamics Power Platform sort of stack as well. So another link that we'll leave you guys with after the session. So SOC reporting is another one too. So systems and organizations controls. So not just the things that you put on your feet. All right. So that's what it stands for. And there's different layers of SOC reporting. And typically, if you're talking about PPM systems, the gold standard usually is something that is the SOC 2 layer. And there's also a type 1 and a type 2 reporting. So type 1's kind of like a design, and type 2 is going further into how the systems are set up and that sort of thing. So SOC 2 type 2 is kind of the gold standard that you'd be aiming for if you're looking for a PPM system. Now SOC 3 kind of implies it's got more. Well, this one's more about facing public facing software, which usually isn't what a PPM software is. But again, if you're looking for a solution out there that is public, then SOC 3 is another one you want to sort of add to that layer. And then security assessments, it's also not can you have a certificate, but it's also proving that you still have, actively validating and the effectiveness of those controls and those processes that are sort of adhered to and attaining those certifications as well. And just as another slide to sort of back that up, these are kind of the gold standard type certifications we see in the market that people are requesting and looking for. So again, a whole bunch of ISO certification around, especially with cloud governance, if you're doing a cloud type solution. But certainly if it was a software as a service, you want to be looking for these things as well. Privacy certifications, we've got business continuity stuff. So this is around disaster recovery and backups, some stuff around the government and regulated industries too. So you'll see the ISM or the IRAP sort of stuff from government regulated industries. And there's also, no surprise with the new world of AI governance coming out, there's an ISO certification for that and some stuff that obviously people are developing too. So we'll cover a little bit more into that shortly. So coming back to this slide here, there's also vendor transparency. So, we've talked about certifications and being able to sort of prove that your ongoing assessments, but how transparent is the vendor in showing that too? So you should be able to ask your vendor for proof that these things are happening and that they're continuing to happen as well. So there's no point seeing a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old report where they did the right thing 5 years ago. You want to see something a little more current, and it's usually like a 1 or 2 year report that you should be able to get that. And for those who are global organizations, just note that there's actually, no surprise, even more certifications and things to help navigate. But, if you're in Europe, there's GDPR, there's stuff like the data privacy framework in the US, etc., FedRAMP, IWASP, all those sorts of things too. Now, the third one here is, does it align with our security architecture? So, Ellie, we're able to just mute someone.
Sorry, Pete, you're just on mute. 1 second.
That's okay. There I am. Hello. So yeah, back to does it align with the security architecture? The important part here is just looking around at what you've got already. It's really important if you can leverage what you've got. Otherwise, you start to build another silo, security silo outside that you need to manage separately. And that might involve more people, more infrastructure, more skills that you need to train out there. So kind of makes sense to look at what you can leverage in-house as well. So, so that's an important part and the pillar there on the left. Identity management is also critical on how easy it is to be able to access a system, but really making sure that that is the real user. So we use things like single sign-on. We use other things like multi-factor authentication to further help secure our applications. Again, if you can leverage what you've got, that's even more of a powerful solution. So you're not creating too many stress points or points of failure for a cybersecurity attack across the organization. And if you're in the Microsoft stack, there's a whole bunch of these other little satellite areas too that you'll see on the right here with Microsoft Entra ID, Purview, Compliance Manager, Microsoft Defender, data loss prevention sort of policies, all that sort of stuff comes into play and sort of it sort of feeds into your application security postures too. So just to be aware, those are a whole bunch of other topics that you can cover too. And I should be at to the next one here, which is number 4, and I'm going to hand over now to Graham. Graham, do you want to take this, Graham?
Yeah, I'll take over sharing.
Thanks, buddy.
6. There we go. Thanks, Pete. Yeah, so the first area that I'll talk about is the how is access controlled, and this dovetails into the previous slides around your identity management and things like that. And this becomes around how are you controlling access to the platform that your PPM solution is sitting in. And before I dive into each of the individual areas, I guess the initial question is, what does good access look like within a PPM platform space? And to me, it's something that keeps you in control of your identity management separate to the PPM solution, so they become independent things that can be managed and controlled. Seamless integration with your existing identity management approaches, so you're not having to double up work. Flexibility is one of those key ones. Organizations change, adapt, and evolve over time, so it's important to have a platform that can adapt and configure and align to what you need, not just now, but as things progress into the future. And it equally doesn't prevent users from getting their required work done. So finding that balance and having the flexibility for that balance. And the top layer, effective warning and reporting controls. If something's outside of the framework, how is it being actually reported and managed and acted upon? So Pete's previous slide of in the Microsoft stack, you have those elements of Purview, et cetera, that allow you to see what's going on. And then the next piece is really, there is a reality around platform models. So every bit of software exists in a platform, and that platform has its pros, cons, and limitations around it, and it's about understanding those and working with them. So a lot of the platform models that you'll see PPM systems exist with, they provide standardized frameworks for the PPM or any other applications to exist within. But there's always operational considerations and trade-offs to make there. And sometimes security becomes about understanding those operational trade-offs to ensure that you've got that streamlined support and delivery. An example from my space is the concept of we have data flows versus data factory. And this isn't a deep tech meeting, but I'll kind of just touch on it. So in the Power Platform space, you have data flows that exist within the environment itself, and they're a great way of ingesting data. They can handle up to millions of rows, be sequenced, and they're very strong and reliable. However, they have an operational limitation that they need to be set up by an interactive account in each environment. They don't support service principals. The alternate is moving up to Data Factory, which exists outside of the Power Platform, but in the Azure space, but does support service principals, but would expand your footprint. So when you're considering not only the platform, but also the ways in which you're going to use it and what the operational trade-offs are going to be for overhead and governance. For the data flows section, yes, you've got to have an interactive account to set up and manage that data ingestion, but it's streamlined and quick and contained to one environment. You move into Data Factory, you open a whole new part of the platform up that needs its own governance and its own structures that need to be managed. So something to keep in mind there. Another thing to recognise is this is a very, very complex space. And what you're looking for in a platform is an established platform that has a lot of those things documented and controlled for you. And even then, it's really hard to track. So I'll just drag it on the screen here and we can share the link afterwards. The one that I do strongly recommend if you're just trying to do it, and while it is slightly government, it's a great resource for anyone setting up in their environment, is the Australian Signals Directorate Blueprint for Secure Cloud. And it takes you down into the individual elements of how you can configure an environment to make it very strong and robust in that cloud space, specifically from a Dataverse perspective. So great resource. And if you're on another platform, look for resources that have that kind of backup and support for you so that you don't need to read all the docs. You have a way to be supported for your own growth. Now, looping back to the actual page. So how is access controlled? What are the considerations that we're looking at here from a PPM platform perspective? we want to have a good understanding of what the role-based security mechanism is going to be and how we're maintaining that least privileged access. So how granular can we control the access to the data, for what project, for what program, and under what conditions? Do we have the option to take that same granularity down to the field levels and actually control it at the field level? If you're doing it at the field level, how are these things all being applied? Is it at the API level? Is it right down to the table to make sure that you understand where that data separation is? And then also knowing the minimal level access for a user to complete their role. Sometimes it sounds really simple to say, yep, I know what a project manager needs to do or a portfolio manager needs to do, until you actually open it up and start trying to work through with them. And often you find they have over permissions to what they actually need to govern. So that is how you can kind of evaluate a platform from that perspective. The next layer down becomes business unit and team level security. And that becomes a much more complex thing. If you need actually full data segregation within your system without creating separate infrastructure and cloud spaces, can your platform support that? It isn't a heavily used area from my experience in terms of full data segregation, but you do want to be able to go that way if your organization gets to that level. So you want to make sure you've got flexibility to move in that space. I do put a caveat every time we consider whether a business unit type separation is required, that first consider whether the same result can be achieved through appropriate role-based security, and you don't need that level of complexity added on top. Segregation of duties is one that can keep you streamlined. IT teams can often become the bottleneck, lots of requests, things to handle, and lots of different platforms to manage. So it becomes, can your platform give you ways to separate what is needed to be done by IT and what can be done by the PPM administrators, so an EPMO, that type of structure. So that could look like, it does vary per organization, it could look like environment access is controlled by IT, but the role-based security system allows the EPMO, who are closer to their teams and closer to the people involved, to control the level of access within that environment. So that could be, they control who's in project manager, who's in portfolio manager, etc. So that can be a really useful lens to put on it. So do you have the flexibility to make it so you don't have this centralized linchpin? And the last one is access reviews. So necessary oversight of who has what role. A lot of projects, they'll go live and the teams disband and they move on. But if you're not doing regular access reviews, yearly, half yearly, whatever aligns with your organization needs, what you often find is higher access is granted temporarily for some reason and not taken away. A user has changed roles, a secondment gave them extra access and it was never rolled back. So having those access reviews in place and making sure you've got a way to see and visualize those within the platform is a really good way to check out how this needs to be set up. I've found from multiple reviews of access that, a lot of people end up in that admin EPMO space that really can be pushed back down to project manager, portfolio manager level. So you control that least privilege access in a very effective way to make your life easier. All right, that was my first one. So I get to hand to Chris now. So if you want to take over when you're ready.
Thank you, Graham. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Is everyone able to see that? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to be talking about when you're sort of looking for a solution, what your PPM solution ultimately should be recording when it comes to audit logs. So overall audit logging is the sort of backbone of accountability within the platform. It's how we know who did what and when quite definitively. It allows us to go ahead and create a record or a timeline of any individual records, any individual record from start to finish to deletion. So your system's audit logs should ultimately capture, as I mentioned earlier, who did what, when, and from where within the systems. Ideally, your audit logs should be absolutely immutable, tamper-proof, not editable by anyone. The access to be able to administer audit logs should be really, really tightly controlled. And this plays into sort of Graham's point earlier. We don't want to be giving everyone admin roles, especially for this reason, right? There are some areas of the system that really should just be stripped down to a core few people. And critically as well, when it comes to audit logs, we're not just talking about data within the environment. So you might think the modification of a project, a risk or an issue, so on. We also want to capture when a user's actual roles change, when a solution is deployed into an environment, when an admin setting is toggled, enabled, or disabled, and so on, right? The system's audit logs should be not only for the data within the system, it should be for the entire platform. And then ideally, we want to be able to see, hey, can the audit log data that is generated by the system be piped into an existing sort of monitoring and security platform? So to Pete's point earlier, a tool, for example, if you're in the Microsoft stack, such as Microsoft Purview, the ability to pipe your data into something like that so that it can be all centrally managed and paired up with other indicators within your environment. When it comes to record history, as I mentioned earlier, we should be able to reconstruct a record's full history over time, from creations to all the updates in between, and then ultimately either deactivation or deletion. We need to be able to ensure that the audit retention history, if we have control over it, is set to the retention that is required by your organization. Right? So whether that be 1 year, 5 years, 7 years, and so on. And if we don't have that ability to control the retention, understanding how long that retention history is set for, and then managing that in for example, doing extracts if it's required. Not only though, when it comes to sort of record history, are we looking at sort of, when it comes to audit history, are we looking at individual records as well? We may also want to be able to capture when a user last accessed the system. So, a common scenario I see is that, and this helps not only for regular sort of security auditing, but also just identifying stale licenses. Being able to see when a user last accessed the system is really important. It helps us clear out licenses and people that don't need or aren't using the system. But also, if users have higher privileges, such as admin or even standard project manager, making sure that those roles are removed from those users that aren't accessing the system, ultimately leaning into the sort of principle of least privilege that Graham was mentioning earlier. So being able to understand, so for user roles, the actual user roles in your environment, so having that in a readily available report, and managing your security roles in such a way where we're not, when onboarding users, for example, individually, if you're managing, for example, a system that may have 1,000 users, we're not going in and we're tweaking each user's access individually. We need to make sure that we're doing that in a scalable manner, for example, through groups. And then for compliance reporting, we need to be able to, our logs should be easy to access, searchable, in case, say, an auditor comes up tomorrow and asks for information, or if you need evidence to support your own ISO certification or IRAP or any internal audit requirements. And on my next slide here, so following the forensic trail, I think there's sort of 5 key questions, right? Are admin changes? These are 5 key questions you should ask yourself when choosing a PPM solution and evaluating the audit logs. Are admin changes captured in immutable logs that cannot be quietly edited or deleted? Can we reconstruct who changed the record, what they changed, and when? And are activity logs retained long enough to meet our compliance obligations? If an auditor asked for evidence tomorrow, could we produce a compliance report quickly? And then, oh, what have I done? Apologies, guys. 1 moment, please. Press the wrong button. My bad. Here we go. Let me just share out my screen again. All right. And do we have the forensic capability to track any particular action back to its source? And with that, I will hand it back to you, Graham.
Thanks, Chris. All right, I've got a couple of less meaty ones, or ones that I can cover much more briefly, but still important part of the checklist to consider. This one, Michelle kind of goes into a bit more detail later around the top level around it, but a question you need to be looking at is, can we trust the implementation and support partner? So platforms are implemented and supported by various mechanisms. So can you actually, do you know who they are? Do you trust them? Falls into the certification space as well. This can be especially important when the platform is new to the organization. So if it's the first Power Platform implementation or the first on a certain stack that you need to do it, because it increases your exposure, because you need to build up your own portfolio management capability while ensuring your vendor meets compliance. So it becomes a balancing act of leveraging expertise while maintaining operational controls. Appropriate controls need to always be applied, no matter how trusted, but you're still going to need that level of visibility, whether that can be controlled through identity management or if it needs to be done through personal accountability mechanisms such as baseline V1 clearances, NDAs, to make sure that there's that ownership of what's going in the data and how they're handling and what they can see and how they interact with it. So important consideration. In terms of the 5 points is you kind of want to trust, but you also need to be verifying. So has the partners, every consultant been background screened? Is that something that needs to be done for your organization? How are they getting granted? Is it through approved channels? Are you aware of where they're logging in from? Do you have the ability to revoke, part of that centralized identity management? And are the partner actions being logged, not only for the data interactions, but any solution changes and elements in the background? Generally, from a delivery perspective, once you're down in the ground, you generally know and trust the partner, but then you need to figure out how you're going to manage this effectively. So challenges and things that you want to consider is giving time-blocked access with clear offboarding, onboarding points to make sure that people aren't in too long. What the access is going to be for lifecycle management, ongoing support, and how you can manage it in a streamlined way. You don't want the governance to get in the way of the result while still necessary and important. And what that looks like post go live, that becomes an often challenge in a shared responsibility model. And understanding what level of operational dependency you've taken on your implementation partner. So where your own upskills and implementations, upskills and knowledge base might need to increase to allow you to have that kind of, if my vendor disappeared tomorrow, are we still functionally okay? So definitely important considerations there. So security posture is not just about the technical architecture, it's about the people operating within it just as much. Now, this might sound a little bit, so the next point covers how are the changes being managed, and this is separate from what Chris was talking about before with data management and those type of elements. It's about the solution release management and making sure that you have appropriate ALM and structures around that. So they need to be effective, controllable, and auditable. So whether that's having pipelines with approvals attached to them, making sure you meet those kind of minimum standards of development, test, and production environments, that it will align with your internal change control processes. Nothing more frustrating than have a platform that needs to deploy one way, but your internal change control processes don't like it that way, so they can sometimes end up at odds with each other. And making sure you understand the outside of just the code deployment part of what are the extra things that need to wrap around it. So I know from my own experience, it's what manual backups need to be taken with an understood rollback plan with timeframes. Is there an access window that the users need to be able to do post checks and PVT and data for configuration changes, and ensuring that there's that right level of visibility to the source in the target environment so that as a project drags on, you don't see configuration drift between environments. So often you'll see a go live scenario happen where dev test prods all lined up, and it's go live, the vendor disappears for a year or so, 2 years, however long, and they come back and they don't have access to prod, but they start working dev and they push their way up. And it's not until you start to try and push those new things up into prod that you suddenly discover that someone did the wrong thing 2 years ago. So some things don't rear themselves to later. So it's more making sure that you've got effective change management right through the chain up to go live and beyond, so it's managed in an ongoing sense. So in terms of questions, are dev test prod kept as separate, knowing how you're going to manage those? Does every change pass documented approval? So how does it align with your internal stuff? Beyond just the code, does their production changes tracked to the who, when, and why? How fast can you roll back if a release fails? Those type of things. And that can be a double layer to these things when you consider a lot of the platform world out there where you'll have what's functionally a base solution, so the core product, and then you've got localized changes that you're making within your environment, either through a vendor or via yourself, and making sure you have clear visibility of the pipeline of how the base updates or that core product that you've done and how your layer sits on top and how they're both deployed and managed in a way that doesn't impact end users. So it's about balancing delivery speed with governance and finding that balance for your organization. So that is that one. So I will throw it back over the fence to Chris, if you're ready.
Thank you, Graham. I'll be going over governance. So yeah, when it comes to governance, in particular, looking at sort of governance through a security lens, the PPM system sort of should be able to do, I think, the following key kind of things. So when it comes to sort of workflow controls and all your projects, programs, portfolios, even risks, issues, status updates should be standardized. They should follow the same path, including any required stage gates and required fields. Right? Ideally, we shouldn't have a system that allows people to skip through these sort of stage gates, processes, checks. And it's going to include approvals as well, which I'll discuss a little bit later. So ideally, instead of a user having to remember from memory what is the next step in a project, program, portfolio, risk, issue, so on, right? They should be able to have an easily accessible and an intuitive process flow that the system guides them through. When it comes to sort of stage gates, we should be able to create and maintain stage gates between projects. And a stage gate may contain required fields in order to progress between project stages, for example, from planning to implementation, to closing to BAU. And we should be able to have, in between those stages, where required, approval processes that are captured and logged. And those approval processes should go to a sort of defined authority that goes out and stamps the project or program and so on as ready to progress. Ideally, we shouldn't allow users to self-approve. So those should go over to, for example, a governance board or the project sponsor. And every approval should be captured and sort of time-stamped in real time. In terms of overall portfolio governance, we should be able to see how the status of all projects, so what current stage they're on through reporting. And when it comes to policy enforcement, we need to be able to apply guardrails so that your organization's processes are followed as the project or individual record progresses. So ideally, we want to reduce offline approvals or decisions and actually timestamp those in the system as formal approvals. So when it comes to just a few tests and questions you can ask yourself, I'll build this out. So does the platform enforce the right sequence of steps automatically, or can teams skip processes when it's inconvenient? So this is actually about striking a correct balance. We don't want to make a process or a governance process so restrictive that people don't engage with it at all, or they skip out on adding information to the system. But we do want to make sure that ultimately, from a sort of high level, the overall stages within a project are being followed, and that can be project, program, portfolio, risk, issue, so on, right? Are approvals enforced and traceable by the platform? So that'll be making sure that the approval before, for example, progressing to the next stage of either a status update or a project, is the approval actually being captured, and is the approval being approved, rejected with comments, and so on, right? A conditional data access policy is clear and enforced down to the database layout. So we just need to, I think, ideally, for sensitive data, make sure that information is actually being calculated and sort of locked down in such a way where users can't go and manually modify that. So, for example, if you were looking at the overall budget and you were doing a calculation on that for your particular project, and making sure that that is calculated by the system and it's not just a user putting that in. Can leadership see the whole portfolio in place? And can we prove governance controls were actually enforced and not just documented? And the next one I'll talk about is integrations. So next I'll be talking about integrations. I'll go over a few points when it comes to integration. So when it comes to integration governance, we need to make sure, sort of even before any work starts, right? Has the integration been documented, right? A design, I should say. Has a design been created? Has a design been created, reviewed, and ultimately accepted by everyone? That's the first most important step when designing an integration or when implementing integration into your PPM platform. That document should ideally cover, how is the data accessed, and what is the format of that data? What's the target destination of that data within your PPM system? And how often is that data refreshed at a minimum, right? We should also look, when it comes to sort of integration governance, is the implementation of, DLP policies. And that'll dictate, if we're bringing in finance data, for example, how that finance data is allowed to interact with the rest of the system, if it's allowed to be exported, and so on. When it comes to sort of API security for an integration, we want to ideally identify within our integration document, for example, right, how that data is being extracted from the source system, and then how is it being loaded into the PPM system. So this goes to sort of one of the points that Graham was talking about earlier, when it comes to either using, do we want to use API keys, service principals, and so on, and go down a Azure Data Factory route when it comes to importing data, or do we want to instead utilize maybe a more manual method for extracting data from the system? For example, doing a CSV export, an automated CSV export even, for example, where that gets placed into the location and then utilizing something like a data flow to go and pick that up. And then I think importantly, data classification, when we're implementing, for example, either a finance integration or maybe even a HR integration, it's important to note that by bringing that into our PPM system, we're actually increasing the scope of the data held by the PPM system, right? You're not only holding project data, you may be holding finance data or resource data, and that may come with additional sort of compliance requirements that need to be evaluated. For example, big one, as Pete mentioned earlier, is data residency. So do you have control over where the data is stored? Is that being, do you have a regulatory requirement to store data in Australia, for example? Can you choose that when setting up a PPM platform, or do you need to ultimately sort of thoroughly read through the privacy policies or whatever SaaS solution that you're implementing to make sure that it complies with any data residency requirements you may have? And is the platform cleared to store, for example, sensitive or protected data? And for that one, we may look towards, for example, on the Power Platform or in Dataverse, Microsoft's IRAP certifications, if you're implementing a Dataverse-based solution. When it comes to sort of generally external systems, do you understand how, when implementing integration, the data is being ingested from the external system? Is there a system in between what I would call the source of truth system, so for example, the finance system, and the PPM system? Are we extracting data into via a external process? Is there what steps is happening to that data before it reaches our PPM system? Because it's something that we need to evaluate to make sure that there's no modification of data while it's in transit to the system, where we ultimately publish it and make it available for project managers, for example, right? And I think generally, ultimately, for notifications on notifications, monitoring, and loading for your integration, I want to make sure that when a file's been uploaded or when we ingest a file from an external system, are we doing some sort of checks on it? Are we making sure that the data is correct, it hasn't been modified while it's in transit? And we can do that through something like a header validation, if it's a CSV file, or a hash. I'm checking out like an MD5 or SHA-256 hash of the file, just to make sure that no tampering has happened while it's in process. So in a general note, I've mainly been talking about integrations into your PPM system, bringing finance into your finance app in a PPM solution or HR data. But all of these same sort of principles also are important if you're integrating out to another system. If you're generating an export that would be ingested, for example, by a data lake for a centralized reporting infrastructure, for example, right? And like 5 key questions. How is every integration that is adding or removing data authenticated? So are we going with API keys, interactive user accounts, and so on? Does every integration have an owner accountable for its lifecycle, right? So if something goes wrong, do we know who to reach out to? And that's really important. That's captured in the integration document and design document that's generated, right? Who can we reach out to if something goes wrong? Is sensitive data still protected when it's ingested into the PPM platform? So looking at data residency and IRAP certifications, for example. Do the integrations follow a standardized design pattern? So critically, if we're doing multiple integrations, we don't want them built from the ground up in different ways. Ideally, they should be standardized and follow the same sort of approach. And how quickly would we detect a failing or misbehaving integration? And that's where those notifications I mentioned come into play. I will hand it back to Graham now.
Thanks, Chris. And now we hit probably the buzzword one, where we talk about AI. And at the platform layer, it's not, it could be a whole session in itself. So I've kind of tried to condense this one down to a few key things that you need to look for, because this is a rapidly evolving landscape and it continues to evolve. Like Pete showed earlier, the certifications that are developing. Are we following the ethos around AI and secure development around that? So Pete's touched on those overarching principles, certifications and guidance around AI. And then it becomes a question of how does it translate to that PPM platform level? And it can kind of boil down to a few key things at the individual platform level. And it functionally becomes, do I have control of what AI is being used within the PPM solution and control over which elements? So have you got control to ensure that you've got human accountability for any decisions and where they come from? Will it respect the data access levels of the user that's working within it? So AI doesn't work from the UI, it works from what data it can see. So traps of security by obscurity where something's hidden, but technically the user has it through access to an API, can be traps that'll come from the AI space. And also, can it align with your internal framework? Every organization is at a different level of AI adoption. So you want a platform that both at the high level, so I know we've talked about Microsoft Stack a little bit here today, but there's a lot built into that high level Entra and Azure space, but down to the platform level where you're actually implementing the PPM solution, can you adapt it? So to give you an idea of what that looks like in practice, this is a back-end platform admin area. And what you're really looking for, because this is going to evolve, and what I show you here might be changed next week, might change the next week after. So it's about having control over it. And even just for an individual environment, we've got control over certain Copilot, what agents, how people can access MCP models within it, whether they can bring in external models or have to use Copilot, so whether they can use Anthropic models, how AI prompts are used, and at the UI side, do we enable users to have AI form fill assistant, smart paste, and all those extra AI things? So I think it's really important when you assess a platform to just understand the level of granularity that you have over that control to AI so that you can adjust it both for your initial release and then as it expands and AI use increases, that you can easily scale it up, turn it up, turn it down to make sure that you're aligned, because without that control, there is no universal, hey, this is the standardized AI adoption platform for an organization. So that's the end of my and Chris Kay's section. So I will hand over to Michelle next. I'll just give you control, Michelle.
Thank you. Thanks, Graham and Chris. Just waiting for it to click through. Here we go. We've covered a lot of ground today. Oh, let's go back. So there we go. Architecture, access controls, role-based security, auditing, and AI controls, powerful stuff. So I know you guys have been taking in a lot of information at a bit of speed. But now what I'd like to do is close on the thread that ties it all together, and it's the human one. Because here's the thing about every control we've discussed today. Behind each one is a person. Behind the audit log is someone who monitors it. Behind the access model is someone who grants the right. Behind the security framework is a team who has to live it. every day, long after the contract is signed. So as we wrap up, I want to zoom out from the platform and talk about the people you partner with. Because in my experience, you're never just buying software, you're choosing who's going to sit alongside your team, often for years. And it's an often repeated phrase of mine. I always say people do business with people. So a platform can be certified, compliant, and beautifully architected and still fail you if the people behind it don't operate with integrity. So the question I want to leave with you isn't just, is this platform secure, but is this a genuine partner? So I was reminded of this recently. Sorry, guys, jumping around while I just get to speed. At a conference that I was with on a public and private sector partnerships. And there were several leaders there from federal, state and government, local governments, who spoke really candidly about what they actually want from their private industry partners. And that message was consistent, and that's that the hard challenges are not going to be solved by one sector alone, and it's always going to take deep, deliberate, trusted collaborations. So on the back of that, let me share a few practical things to look for when you're looking for a good PPM partner. So first of all, watch how they treat your procurement and probity process. A genuine partner is going to respect the rules of the game. They're not going to ask for the quiet word on the side. They don't try to shortcut probity. And when they do have contact, they declare it. So it's looking for, do they understand why you have to ask the questions you ask? Whether you're a private company or a government agency, everybody is looking for someone trustworthy and ensuring that they're going to receive value for money. So, however, government, though, is also spending taxpayer money. So, by design, procurement there is risk adverse, and a partner who gets that and who sees assurance questions as legitimate, not as friction, is a partner who will respect the guardrails once you're working together. Second, security. So, anyone can say they take security seriously. I can say that right now. However, a genuine partner is going to show you. The obvious requirements are cleared people where clearance is needed, vetting and training that's current. I think we touched on that a little bit earlier, but also internal accountability, where inside the partner themselves, they're holding each other accountable to practice it in daily business life. They're ensuring that that each team member is reminding another one of the right or wrong thing to do, or just where there is this understanding of the need to know principle, and also that access is going to follow the work. And not just the job title. And also, does the partner really understand and willingly accept that there's a cost to doing business with you? So meeting robust standards takes extra effort, and your partner needs to ensure they have the right capability inside their own organisation. A company who does that willingly before you've asked is telling you something about who they are. Third, a worthy PPM partner should show you the right and obvious behaviours from the get-go. Are they transparent about what they can't do, not just what they can? Will they tell you we can't hit that date, but here's an alternative and these are the impacts, rather than overpromise and scramble later? Do they surface a conflict of interest early, even when it's awkward? That's integrity. And you can't put integrity into a contract clause. You read it in behaviour, usually in the small moments, and their automatic default replies to you. It's a willingness to be easy to work with because they understand that you have rules to follow. And whilst both of us might at times find those rules a bit onerous, that's the requirement of doing work together. Then there's also, and last but not least, the partnership mindset itself. To me, this is the biggest one. The best partners don't arrive with a solution looking for a problem. They arrive wanting to understand why the problem exists. They're really curious and they will co-design with you. They share the risk rather than push it all back onto you. And when a milestone slips, and one always does, they'll sit down and ask, how do we fix this together, rather than reaching for the penalty clause. And that's the difference between working with a vendor and a partner. A vendor delivers and leaves, and a partner stays on the journey with you. And this just isn't my view. At the conference I mentioned, one CTO put it beautifully. She said she no longer wants to start a conversation with, I want this technology. That's a closed mind. She wants to start it with, I have this problem, an open question. She wants partners who can run fast and not get stuck in protracted procurement, and will help her buy clarity first. So someone who is willing to use an early small engagement to define the real problem before anyone even talks about a solution. Another leader summed it out that as well, that the behaviour every organisation is looking for is in 3 words, and there they are up there on the screen as well. Trust and safety to enable innovative outcomes. I think that's what we're all looking for within our workplaces. So that's the shift from a transactional arrangement focused on delivering compliance to a strategic partnership built on the shared purpose, shared risk, and shared success. So just to close it up, so we've got time for questions as well. This is where I'll wrap it up, because I know we'll be sharing a few checklists with you. But let me be honest about what a checklist can and can't do. It can indicate to you whether a vendor is likely compliant in the ways you need them to be, but it can't tell you if they'll be a genuine partner, because the things that matter most, such as trust, integrity and respect, and the willingness to do the hard thing, even when it's inconvenient, those don't tick a box. But look for those always. It won't be the key focus of the contract you're signing, but always research who the partner is. Who are their people? How do they engage and how do they talk to each other? You can see that on social media. You can see that on LinkedIn where they're commenting and liking. You can go in and read Glassdoor reviews. You can attend things like this and see how they interact to get a sense of who they are and what the company's core values are and if they are reflecting them. So whatever platform you choose, whatever controls you mandate, look past the logo and look at the people. Because at the end of the day, it isn't the spirit of compliance that protects your portfolio. It's the spirit of genuine partnership. And that is always, I think, what matters most. Thanks. So now, Ali, shall we open it up for any questions?
Yes, let's do that. So if anyone's got a question, either put it in the comments or put your hand up. Otherwise, there's a few pre-submitted questions we can quickly go through if we don't have any at the moment. Michelle, I might get you to click to the pre-submitted, please. And I'll pass over to Graham, I think, for these ones.
Yeah, I guess so. The first question is a very interesting one. So who are the important stakeholders for PPM and how do you actually entice them to not only scan data but also take action? It depends what angle you're looking at it. Who are the most important stakeholders at any given moment? If you're talking from the top level down, it's your portfolio managers, your financial teams, the people running the whole portfolio. That's why you choose PPM solutions to surface project level data up to the higher levels. So those tend to be your most important stakeholders, but anyone can be an important stakeholder that's interacting with the system where they're a link in the chain that is actually going to capture and deliver the value for tracking it in a PPM system. And then the $1 million question is, how do you actively encourage and entice those groups to not only scan the data and take action? Always a challenge, especially that sponsor executive level to get them to come into the system. Decentralized approvals that can move out of the system and bring it in is a way to actually get them to interact with it so it lands in their inbox and they can see the content. AI is opening a lot in that space. We can give them more effective summaries and ways to interact with it. And then good solution design and governance. So a streamlined experience to come in, see the data that you need and make it out the other side is another one. But I would say that first question is always going to be a challenge and something that you need to continue to review. And the second one being, how do you embed security and governance controls into day-to-day project delivery without slowing teams down? Another really good question, another challenging one. And I think we kind of touched on all of the points in today's one. So it's about having simple, effective security structures in place that are well understood so that if at the user level they need to access certain data or controls or need to see another project, there's a way for them to do that quite quickly. Decentralized approvals that can move outside the system can keep things moving really well. And those governance and workflow designs that Chris touched on. So an effectively designed stage gate process or approval process that actually just guides the user through it can keep your day-to-day project delivery effective without slowing them down and then sitting within a security system that doesn't restrict them as long as they're operating in their expected work role. I think that's, yeah, unless Pete or Chris or anyone's got anything they want to add.
Nailed it, Graham.
Perfect. So I might wrap up then if we're all happy with that one. So thank you all for attending today. Thank you, presenters. This has been a great session. The recording, slides and additional material will be sent out to your emails shortly. We do have another webinar coming up on July 29th, which you will also be sent to register. Enjoy the rest of your week and we look forward to seeing you in our next session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
all.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.